It is the winter of 1944. Deep inside a frozen Norwegian mountain, a scientist named Kurt Diebner stands over a device that could end the war in a single afternoon. Not by defeating armies, not by breaking supply lines, by erasing a city from the surface of the earth. The target, London. The weapon, a nuclear bomb. And on this night, Nazi Germany is closer to detonating one than the rest of the world will admit for another 50 years. The Allies don't know. Churchill doesn't know. And the men who do know are about to make a decision that history has never fully reckoned with. This is not a story about what almost happened. This is a story about what nearly did. To understand how Germany came within reach of an atomic bomb, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the war, to the lab. In December 1938, two German chemists working in a basement in Berlin changed everything. Otto Hahn and Fritz Stresemann bombarded uranium with neutrons and split the atom. Nuclear fission. It was the most dangerous discovery in human history, and it happened first in Germany. Not America, not Britain, Germany, when physicist Lise Meitner, who had fled Nazi persecution just months earlier, calculated the energy released in that reaction. She understood immediately what it meant. She wrote to her colleague Otto Frisch with trembling urgency. The numbers were staggering. 1 kilogram of uranium, if properly split, could release the equivalent of 20,000 tons of conventional explosive. A single bomb, a single city, gone. The Nazi regime didn't miss the implications. Neither did the scientists themselves. Several of Germany's Jewish physicists had already fled. Einstein to America, Meitner to Sweden, Frisch to Britain. They carried their knowledge with them like a torch running from fire. But the fire kept burning. By April 1939, the German Army Weapons Office had launched what they called the Uranverein, the Uranium Club. Germany's finest physicists were drafted into a secret weapons program. Werner Heisenberg, one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, was placed at its head. The man who had won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1932 was now racing to build a weapon of absolute destruction for Adolf Hitler. And at first, he was winning. By 1940, Germany had something no other nation possessed. They had the world's largest supply of uranium ore, seized from mines in occupied Czechoslovakia. They had the world's most advanced theoretical physics community. They had heavy water production facilities in Norway at a plant called Vemork, and heavy water was the key moderator needed to sustain a nuclear chain reaction. And they had Werner Heisenberg himself, who believed as late as 1941 that Germany could produce a functioning nuclear reactor within months. The Allies were terrified, and they were right to be. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary intelligence operations ever conducted. In London, a Danish physicist named Niels Bohr, who had escaped Nazi-occupied Copenhagen through Sweden crammed inside a bomb bay, arrived with a message that shook Allied command. He reported that Heisenberg had visited him in September 1941, that Heisenberg had drawn a diagram, that the diagram looked like a bomb. The meaning was clear. Germany wasn't just theorizing. Germany was building. The British response was immediate and ruthless. Operation Grouse, then Operation Freshman, then Gunnerside, each one aimed at a single target. The Vemork heavy water plant in the Telemark region of Norway, perched on a cliff face above a frozen gorge, defended by German soldiers and reachable only across some of the most inhospitable terrain in Europe. The first attempt, in November 1942, was a catastrophe. 2 British gliders carrying Royal Engineer assault teams crashed in the Norwegian mountains. The survivors were captured. The Gestapo executed them on the spot under Hitler's infamous commando order, which decreed no quarter for Allied special forces. Their bodies were dumped and hidden. 34 men, dead before the mission even reached the target. But the British didn't stop. On the night of February 27, 1943, 6 Norwegian resistance fighters from the Special Operations Executive dropped into a blizzard above the Hardangervidda Plateau. They had trained for months. They had lived rough in the mountains for weeks. They were half-starved, frostbitten, and utterly determined. Led by Joachim Ronneberg, they descended the cliff face in darkness, crept through the plant's cable shaft, a route the Germans had left unguarded because no sane person would use it and place their charges on the heavy water cells. The explosion was small, almost disappointingly quiet for the magnitude of what it was defending against. But it was precise and devastating where it counted. 18 heavy water cells destroyed. 600 kilograms of high-concentration heavy water gone in seconds. The saboteurs escaped on skis across 60 kilometers of frozen wilderness before German forces even reached the wreckage. Not one man was killed. Not one man was captured. It was the most successful act of sabotage in the entire war. But here is the twist that most people never hear. It didn't stop Germany. Within months, Vemork was back in partial production. The Germans began shipping what heavy water reserves they had left to the right. And Heisenberg and the Uranverein continued their work. The Allied sabotage had set the program back, but it had not ended it. Germany was still building toward a reactor. And a reactor was the precondition for a bomb. What the Allies didn't fully understand yet was that Germany's nuclear program had a fracture running through its heart. Werner Heisenberg made an error. It was not sabotage. It was not resistance. It may have been, as some historians argue, intentional. But the official verdict of science is that it was a mistake. Heisenberg miscalculated the critical mass of uranium needed to sustain a chain reaction. He believed it would require tons of the material, an industrial quantity that no wartime economy could realistically produce. The Americans, working in secret at Los Alamos, would discover the true figure was far smaller. But Heisenberg never corrected his calculation. And because of that single error, Hitler was never told a nuclear bomb was achievable in the time frame of the war. Consider the weight of that for a moment. The entire trajectory of World War II may have pivoted on one physicist's mathematics. But the danger was not yet over, because Kurt Diebner had not given up. Diebner was Heisenberg's rival inside the Uranverein. Older accounts of the war tend to gloss over him. He doesn't have Heisenberg's biography, his Nobel Prize, his philosophical mystique. But in many ways, Diebner was the more dangerous man. A less celebrated physicist, yes, but a more ruthless and practical one, answerable not to academic institutions, but directly to the Wehrmacht. While Heisenberg operated through the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute with a kind of academic detachment, Diebner ran his own parallel research group under direct military control. By late 1944, Diebner had constructed a nuclear device of a different design, not a bomb in the Finnish sense, but a reactor assembly using uranium cubes suspended in heavy water, capable in theory of achieving criticality. If it had gone critical, the chain reaction could have been catastrophic. Uncontrolled, irreversible, Diebner lacked the refined uranium and the precise engineering to weaponize it fully. But the men watching from Allied intelligence didn't know that. They didn't know where the ceiling of German capability truly was, which is why in late 1944, the Americans launched Operation Alsos, a name taken from the Greek word for grove, a pointed nod to General Leslie Groves, who commanded the Manhattan Project. A combined team of scientists and soldiers, led by Dutch-American physicist Samuel Goudsmit, raced across liberated France and into the heart of Germany, one step behind the advancing front lines, hunting for every trace of the Nazi nuclear program. They were racing not just to find evidence. They were racing to prevent the Soviets from finding it first. What they found stunned them. Germany had been far closer than the Allies dared assume. Heisenberg's lab in Hagerloch, hidden in a cave beneath a church in southern Germany, contained a working reactor assembly, uranium cubes hanging on chains inside a heavy water tank, surrounded by graphite. When Allied scientists examined it in April 1945, they calculated it was within measurable distance of criticality. A few more months, a slightly different configuration, perhaps a larger supply of heavy water from Norway. Perhaps. And then came the revelation that rewrote everything. In August 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists, including Heisenberg, Hahn, and Diebner, were interned at Farm Hall, a country house in England, and secretly recorded by British intelligence. When they heard the news of the atomic bomb on the radio, Their reaction was not what anyone expected. They were devastated. Not morally, professionally. Heisenberg refused to believe it at first. He said it was impossible. He said the Americans must have used a different method. He spent the night alone, recalculating, and by morning he had found his own error. The critical mass he had calculated was wrong. Had been wrong all along. In the recorded transcripts, declassified only in 1992, you can hear the moment a man of genius realizes that a single mathematical mistake may have saved the world. Otto Hahn, the man who had first split the atom, sat in silence that night and wept. He said he felt personally responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians. He said he'd spent years of the war fearing his discovery would be used for exactly this purpose, by his own side. That night, British guards posted outside his room feared he would take his own life. He didn't, but he never fully recovered. The story of a Nazi nuclear program is not a story of inevitable failure. It is a story of how close the abyss truly was. A story of how the difference between a world where London burns under a nuclear cloud and a world where it doesn't may come down to a single wrong number on a calculation sheet. A handful of half-starved Norwegian saboteurs on skis in a blizzard, and a physicist who perhaps, just perhaps, understood what he was doing when he made his error. We will never know for certain whether Heisenberg chose to fail, whether the mistake was a mistake. The farm hall transcripts are ambiguous. Historians are divided. His defenders argue that Heisenberg was never truly trying, that he deliberately steered the program toward failure, that he was protecting civilization from within. His critics point to the same transcripts and hear only a man rationalizing his own incompetence in the aftermath of the defeat. Both sides have evidence. Neither side has certainty, and Heisenberg himself gave contradictory accounts until his death in 1976. But this much is certain. The technology was real. The intent was real. The program was real. And the world in which we live. Every city standing, every person born after 1945, every child who grew up without knowing what it means to live under a mushroom cloud, exists inside the narrow corridor between what happened and what almost did. Between the world that was and the world that nearly became. The bomb was never dropped on London, but it was built for London. It was aimed at London, and for one cold winter in occupied Norway, inside a frozen plant on a clifftop above a black gorge. The only thing standing between that bomb and its target was 6 men with skis, homemade charges, and a cable shaft that one German soldier forgot to guard. 6 men against the end of city. Against the end, perhaps, of the war itself. History is not made by the powerful alone. More often, it is quietly, finally, decisively saved by the ones nobody expected. The ones history almost forgot.